Okay, cool. Couple points. I mean, just some takeaways that I'm hearing from the group. It's it's important to take a look at the people that we're intending to follow or the people that we know are going to have influence over our lives and to decide whether or not we want to allow them to influence us. That's number one. Number two is it's hard to answer a question as to whether or not we're going to be influenced by a person until we really know who they are authentically. We need more conversation. We need to rub up against them a little bit. I heard a story about I'm probably going to tell it wrong, but this this CEO, very important person, said that what they talk about in their organization is the rub factor, not the intelligence factor or the charisma factor. They talk about the rub factor. And so it goes like this is the people you rub up against in life are going to impact you in one way or another. They're going to impact you towards a positive thing or they're going to impact you negatively. And if we understand the people we surround ourselves with, when we rub up against them, a portion of them comes onto us. We would think more about who we're rubbing up against. And so the rub factor matters. Hopefully that the way I told that was not nearly as good as what I heard it, but if you can think about the rub factor, if you're rubbing up against leaders that you do not agree with, that do not have similar values to you, that you think are dishonest, then whether you know it or not, that the fact that you surround yourself by them, it's going to it's going to rub off on you. So it's that's important. And what I also know is that no leader's perfect. I heard that, and I think everyone discussed that. And some of the things that we may not be good at, for instance, having a traits of say dyslexia and ADHD, there's ways in which we can possibly compensate for that. We can hire around that. We can have administrative assistants check our emails and communicate to our team. Yet it doesn't mean that those things aren't still important. So if we do know our weaknesses and say communication via email is one of them, we have to be intentional about finding a way to do it regardless. Even if we're not good at it, it's still a duty that a leader has, and a leader has to complete that duty. So one of the things that I thought about when I was hearing that story is my grandmother, who I love dearly, when email was, she has passed away. She passed away in 2020, but this was when email first started coming out. This was like 2003. I mean, probably earlier than that. But we wanted to email my grandma. My grandfather was good on the computer. He would send emails to us. But my grandma did not use the computer at all, ever. And so we bought her a machine that the machine, when we sent an email to an email address, it would actually print out the email. So she could sort of receive it as like a letter on a printer. She didn't like it. She never really used it. But I thought it was an interesting concept. Like just because you don't use the computer doesn't mean you still shouldn't read the correspondence that your family wants to send you via email. So that was like a workaround for her. Again, it was a not a successful workaround because she kind of took offense to it. She was annoyed by it, but we still wanted to communicate with her. So those are some themes that I garnered from that. The way, if I may extend what you said, but also add to it, if people disagree with you, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So what we want to agree on is the fundamental values of what they represent. They may not have they may not agree with you, but where they come from, their values are the same. So values mine is faith, family, leadership, strength, honesty, integrity. I mean, these are values. And if we have a value discussion, which is very important to have, and we just fundamentally disagree that you know, being being nice to people is not important. Let's just say that kindness, I don't value it at all. That's going to be a problem. You know, you're going to see me be unkind to people. You're going to see me disrespect waiters and waitresses in a restaurant. You're going to see me speak ill about my family and my friends. I think that's a fundamental value issue where you should decide whether or not you want to hang around that person. Yet, if we agree on values and maybe we disagree that chemistry is an important subject to take in college, that's okay, you know, because we can have it out with that conversation. But if our fundamental values align, that's a good thing. So, but and then the other thing you said too, um, so you talked about behaviors. So you went from basically people who disagree with you, you know, that's okay to have. But then you said behaviors, that if you see that their behaviors are not okay, the behaviors are a symptom or a sign of values. One of the points I was trying to make as well is that the behaviors can be an indicator of values. So just because a person says, for instance, I say that I value honesty, but you have caught me in lies. What are you going to believe? What I say or what I do? This is the point. So behaviors matter, values matter. Minor disagreements outside of behaviors and values, not as important. We can figure those things out. Okay. Yes, Professor. This is when we closed out last class. We talked about the roles of a leader. And one of the roles that you all mentioned over and over again is this communication role and how important it is. And if this gentleman, Salim, he wasn't performing one of these roles, he would certainly suffer as an effective leader. He probably might be picking up the slack somewhere else. But it's important to understand that these roles have to be fulfilled and they have to be adopted. So one of the roles here, I'm pretty sure it's liaison might be one of them. Coach, negotiator, spokesperson would be a communicative role, strategy developer, executor. So one of the roles that isn't on here, I think it's a managerial role, is being a information transmitter. Like you have to tell people what's going on. But this is where we finished. These are the typical roles of a leader. And so let's move on from here. And remember, this is the first chapter. We're talking about the nature and the importance of leadership. One of the slides, which I think is a great one, is about being tolerant of ambiguity. Who knows what ambiguity means? What's vague is, what AI is going to do 10 years from now. That we may have some indication of, what we see now, and possibly some people forecasting what the future is going to look like, but it's still uncertain. It's still vague. It's ambiguous. What's ambiguous is what hurricane season is going to look like in 2025. What's ambiguous is the extent of the traffic patterns that are going to decrease when school, that's not actually that ambiguous, when school is no longer in session over the summertime. So ambiguity is something leaders deal with all the time. There are decisions that they need to make. There are futures that need to be prepared for, yet we don't have all of the information to prepare for it. Now, the question I ask you, I don't have to answer it, but just think about it. Are you okay with that? Are you tolerant of ambiguity? Are you okay going into a situation where you may not know all of the variables? You don't have all the facts. You don't know everybody's name. You don't know who's going to be there. Will you go anyways? If you thought you were going to go into a situation where you might fail miserably and possibly embarrass yourself in front of other people, but you also could succeed incredibly and and lift yourself up in front of other people, show other people what you can do and your passion and your skill, would you go into that situation where it could be a bad outcome or it could be a good outcome? And this is a skill that can be built up. Your ability to be tolerant of ambiguity is important for leaders to have. Forms of uncertainty will never cease. Leadership is, a lot of it is ambiguous. So here's a great clip from a movie. Let's see if I'll pause it so I can. So this is a movie called Apollo 13, and the situation is that you have unbelievable astronauts working for NASA. It's a movie that's based on a real story, and they had a situation, and here's what the situation looked like. There's a lot of things happening, and I would go ahead and say, of course, you could look at a situation and somebody that acts like the leader, who stands up and tells everybody, okay, one at a time, one at a time. Yeah, he's trying to take charge, but the reality is the leader is the one with the information. The leader is the one, the people are going to listen to the person who has a strong idea of what the heck is happening. So really, it was a team effort in a sense. And then you have a dynamic now between the people in the shuttle. What were the people in the shuttle doing? They were just saying what they see. Here's what I see. Here's what's going on. Here's what's happening. Here's what I did. They were just communicating information back to the main area. What is it called? Houston. And Houston was meant to gather that information to bring in some level of clarity because they had no idea what was going on. And that's a scary thing. And a leader in a situation like that just cripples and breaks down. I don't know what to do, and I don't have the information, and I can't figure this out, and has a panic attack. Isn't a leader in that situation? Yes, of course, they could very well be in a position of leadership, but not a good idea. So you have to be tolerant of ambiguity. That's number one. But also, does anybody know the story about what actually happened and whether or not that shuttle made it back to Earth safe? Okay, so I'll share it with you. So what happened was they did have an issue. It was their oxygen tanks were gone, and one of their thrusters actually no longer worked, and it affected their ability to land the shuttle safely, and also be able to make it back to Earth. They didn't have enough fuel to make it back to Earth, and what happened was Houston was able to find a trajectory path so that they can slingshot around the moon, so that they can actually use the moon's gravitational pull to give them enough power, enough thrust to then make it back to Earth safely. Check my facts on that, but I'm pretty sure that's exactly what happened. And in order for that to have happened, they had to get the information, but they also had to be extremely tolerant of ambiguity because you're looking at the Houston office and you're saying, wait a minute, you're going to do what now? We're going to do what now? We're going to slingshot around the moon, and we think we might make it back to Earth safely. And there's a lot of unknowns here, but they did it, and I thought that was a good video to show on the situations, obviously an extreme, that leaders are faced with ambiguity. But it's important to know that power is a factor in leadership. And what do I mean by power? There's different sources of power. And the word power might, in your mind and in some people's mind, be alluded to a negative thing. And what I want to try to get you to think about from more of an academic scholarly perspective when you think about leadership, leaders, whether you know it or not, if you're influencing somebody, you have an element of power. how you use that power and the intention behind the motive behind using that power is what makes it either good or bad. So the power in and of itself is not a bad thing, but power used against people and a malicious factor is certainly a bad thing. So the more we understand what power is, the more we intentionally drive our own behaviors, the greater chance that we will avoid the trap of falling into the malicious type of power. And in my career, I can attest to that I was in leadership roles of power and influence, and I needed to get things done, and I needed to make sure that the cars were treated well, and that if you broke something within a car, a company car, that you were going to get in trouble. And I was not okay when somebody used the company car and didn't treat it well, and I made sure they knew about it. And over time, I realized that I was misusing my power, that my the way I spoke to people at times and the way that I, let's say, enforced consequences was maybe sometimes needed, but sometimes counterproductive. I was using my power in not a very intentionally positive way. But the more I learned about how to use power, first of all, it's needed, and the more I did it intentionally with hopefully knowing that it exists and knowing how to use it so it's not destructive, but it's a constructive source of using power, the better off I was in my leadership training. So here are the different types of power: legitimate power, power from role or status within an organization. It involves formal authority. Somebody who is the president of an organization has the authority over some of the decisions that are made in that organization. It's just a legitimate power. It doesn't mean that that person knows what they're talking about, or that is a good leader. It just means that they have a legitimate role as a leader. Then this is one of my favorites. It's called referent power. And this power is based on somebody's charisma or likability is what it says here, but it's really the ability for somebody to have these emotional intelligence and relationship management skills to get other people to believe in them in a sense, so that they have quality, positive working relationships with other people. And so usually here's what I try to describe this. There tends to be somebody in the office or somebody in your friend group that everybody goes to I don't want to say gossip, but if something's going on in their life, they go to this person, they talk to them, and this person listens, and they have good, trustworthy relationships with everybody. They don't have any beef with too many people, and that person has relational equity amongst the group, and that is called referent power. And why this is important is because if you're a leader and you're in a group of people and you're trying to influence them and lead them towards a common goal, and you're trying to inspire them, influence them, and there's a process, and you're engaging in the process of leadership, and for whatever reason you seem that they're not really following you the way in which you want them to, there's somebody in that group that very well has relational power that might be influencing them in the opposite direction. And so you have to know who these sources of relational equity are. So if a person knows a lot of people and is good friends with a lot of people and you treat them poorly, believe me, they're going to use their relational equity with their friends to talk bad about you and say, don't follow that guy. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's not nice. So that's why it's important not only for us as leaders to have referent power with other people, that's important, but also to know the other people on our team or that are influencing what's happening in the group, because they have power too. That's a fascinating one. I'm sure that maybe you thought about one or two people in your life that are effective. So I think about my family and my aunts and uncles. And if we're going to plan a family reunion, if one aunt decides that they want to go to Mexico, and everybody else in the group wants to go to Florida, that aunt, because that aunt is very vocal and that aunt's going to call everybody and voice her opinion, you better get in front of her first and talk to her about coming to Florida, and listen to her about Mexico, so that she doesn't, you know, issue a campaign behind your back to get everybody to change their opinion, because she's going to do that. She has influence through referent power, even though you're the one leading the trip. Sure, you get the idea. Expert power stems from a person's skills and knowledge, powerful in areas of expertise. You walk into the doctor's office and it's a surgeon. You just ruptured your Achilles. That's a horrible accident, but sometimes it happens. And the doctor is a specialist in Achilles surgeries. You've never met him or her in your entire life. Does that person have expert power? There's almost a power imbalance in a situation like that. You just trust them because they're wearing the medical coat. They're the doctor. They know how to fix Achilles. You have no idea how to do it. So in that situation, they don't have formal authority over you. They have, you don't have any, they may not have any reference power. They may have terrible social skills, but they have expert power because they know, they have the knowledge and the expertise to do something. That's a powerful one too. Reward power, ability to give rewards or incentives like promotions or pay raises. That's also a form of power. It's a formal form of power. I'm going to note this just for a second so I can classify legitimate power, expert power. Sorry, let's just do that. Reward power, coercive power. These are all forms of formal powers. So usually the people that have legitimate power also have reward power. They have the ability to give rewards and incentives. They also have the ability to coerce somebody. What does it mean to coerce somebody? To influence somebody. But coercion basically says, so I'll use it as a student teacher reference. Coercion basically says, listen, um, I think you're great, you're awesome student, but you missed the first two classes. If you don't come to the third class, I'm going to drop you. So it's sort of coercive. It said, well, I have the power to drop you, and you're going to give me what I want, or you're going to be kicked out of class. So that person acts because they were coerced. Does that make sense? So they choose to come to the third class because the professor said, "Hey, listen, if you don't do it, I'm going to drop you." That's coercive. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And leaders who do this often, or professors who do it often, they tend to it tends to be overbearing on them usually, and it tends not to always work very well with students. I mean, what would be a better approach? Hey, how you doing? What's going on? Why did you miss the first two classes? And you listen and they talk and you say, okay, I understand. Hey, if you can't make the third class, I get it, but here's what's going on here. Here's what we're learning. Here's why you should really come to the third class. And I really don't want to drop you. And please just, try to make a really good effort coming to the third class. If you can't, I'll check in with you after class and see what's going on. That's maybe a different approach, but maybe you need to coerce them because if they need to perform the action, then coercion is certainly a power tactic to get them to do it. So coercive can be used for good, but if done too often and done improperly, it doesn't work well for either the leader or the people being led. I'm sure you understand. All right, so we have so these three are formal power, and then let me see if I can do another color. These ones here, informational power. Remember, I talked about that with the communication, access to valuable knowledge useful for persuasion and influence. Referent power and expert power. These are things called informal power. They don't require a role or a position, and they're usually done through a person's individual competencies and individual skills. And this is why it's so important. Like the question that somebody asked while Linda was speaking is, how do we influence people when we don't have a leadership role? Well, here it is. You have good relationships with them. You know something about a subject matter, or you have information that they may not have access to, and you provide that information in order to get someone to do something, to get somebody to complete a goal, or to get somebody to travel somewhere, or get somebody to, accomplish a task, whatever that may look like. So informational power is very powerful. Think about the marketing people who collect this big data, and the big data is really valuable because when they put it into these algorithms, you get pictures of Barbie dolls that you don't need for your kids, all over your Facebook feed, and that data that the marketing companies have is informational power. They don't have legitimate power of my life, but they have access to valuable knowledge, and it's useful for persuasion and influence. You get the idea. So the power topic is a fascinating one. I'm sure we'll get back to it soon, but I want to get through this. We already went over some of this, so I'm just gonna show let's see if I can do this. I'm gonna just show this graphic. You have leadership skills, you have professional knowledge, and you have cognitive skills. These are all traits in some way or another, and motives tend to be ways in which leaders can be impactful. I'm not going to talk about all of them because I want to get through it. Communication. This is the big one. Being able to effectively communicate your ideas and your vision is, I would say, incredibly valuable for leaders to have. Communication, the cause or resolution of all human conflict or achievement. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Communication is a two-way street. I hope that I'm not just here, and this is why I like to see your faces sometimes. I'm not here just talking to myself, that it's actually a dialogue, that you're listening. When I see you nodding your head, when I see your little hearts and your emojis, there's some sort of interaction. It's a two-way communication. So good leaders know how to speak and communicate their ideas. They do it non-verbally, they do it verbally, they do it in writing, they do it visually. These are the different forms of communication. And of course, there's a amount of communication, there's richness in communication channels, there's a lot of communication, but it's very important that leaders have. So now we got moved to self-awareness, values and beliefs, passions and motivation, aspirations and goals. Here's what composes me in this moment. Here's a lot of what composes me. My cognitive fluidity, my IQ, my ability to use rational data quickly and to solve problems and to be analytical. Like IQ is important. It tends to be that IQ is something it's inherent in your genes. You're sort of born with it. There's ways in which you can improve your fluid intelligence and your IQ. There's a great book called Moonwalking with Einstein that my wife has read that gets her to remember things better. But science has demonstrated over and over again that IQ, number one, is very important, but also it can't really be changed too much by one's own hard work. What can be changed more so is EQ, emotional intelligence, your ability to be self-aware, your ability to be self-manage yourself. So self-awareness, self-management, then you have social awareness, and you have relationship management. Those are the four factors of emotional intelligence that are very important because of neuroplasticity. Big word there. Our brains can actually change. The synapses in our brains can connect in different ways, and they discovered this in the early 2000s. We can learn how to become more emotionally intelligent through practice. That's why leadership practice is so foundational. And then personality. And personality is a mixture of both of these. It changes a little bit over time. It transforms in certain events. So, for instance, I'm a different person now than before I had children. Why? Because having children is transformational. It changed my personality. And why? Because it was such a, I watched my wife give birth and bring this human into the world, and I did new responsibility, and I thought about the future more. I started driving a little bit slower in my car, and my personality shifted a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. So that's how personality can transform. And when you do your assignment about your assessment, your personality assessment, it's not just a personality assessment, it's a leadership assessment. But personality is an option for one of them, which I highly recommend. This is a really good thing for you to know what your personality traits are so that you can lead people more effectively. Here's another big one. Has anybody learned about leadership styles before, or is this the first time you're seeing this? And the science has changed on this a lot. It tends to be that our IQ, our personality, our EQ, we will gravitate towards a particular style as being sort of our default style, one that we feel most comfortable with. And we'll briefly explain some of these styles. But how the science has continued to progress is that we need to understand all the styles, every style that we're about to talk about, because in certain situations, that style may be more appropriate. So as opposed to me being a transactional leader, which is, hey, class, tonight we need to do these three assignments. And by the end of the class, if you haven't done these three assignments, then I'm going to have to give you a lower grade. Very transactional. Sometimes that's needed. Like we have to know that there's an exchange of a transaction here. When we are a salesperson, we could lead a sales team, but eventually we're going to have to ask the client to buy something from us, and we're going to equate that purchase as a good thing for the sales team. So my sales team, I love them to death, but if they're not selling, they can't be on my team. It is a I want to be friends with them and be relational. I want to have high consideration, but eventually the relationship that I have with the people on my sales team is going to have to be transactional, because if it's not transactional at some point, then I'm going to lose my job. The company's not going to do well. You get the idea. So we can't just ignore certain styles. Okay, so we have servant leadership. Wrote an entire book that kind of centers on servant leadership because it's called Deemed Essential, Finding Greatness in the Business of Serving Others. And there's a whole chapter on servant leadership. We'll talk about it as the class unravels. And maybe I'll just play the first clip to kind of get you guys.
Welcome to Chapter 4 of Deemed Essential, The Servant Leader. In this chapter, we explore the profound impact of servant leadership, particularly in the trade service industry. Leadership isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. Different situations may call for authoritative, democratic, or transformational styles. However, in the trades where collaboration, trust, and personal connection are vital, servant leadership stands out as the most effective approach. The concept of servant leadership, though practiced for centuries, was formally defined by Robert K. Greenleaf in his 1970 essay, The Servant as Leader. Greenleaf describes a servant leader as someone who first feels the desire to serve, which then leads them to aspire to lead. At its core, servant leadership is about nurturing, defending, and empowering followers. It's not just about guiding them in tasks. It's about addressing their needs, helping them grow, and equipping them to take on more responsibility. In Chapter 4, the author of Deemed Essential shares his journey of understanding this philosophy while managing his family business with over 100 employees. Initially, he relied on task-driven and authoritative methods that didn't yield long-term results. In one pivotal moment, he faced a crisis in team morale. Skilled technicians felt disconnected and unappreciated, and as performance metrics slipped, the company's growth was threatened. Instead of resorting to strict control or new policies, he chose to listen. In one conversation, a longtime technician voiced his frustration about being overlooked for promotions. This moment shifted the author's perspective. He realized that his success depended on his team more than they depended on him. By incorporating empathy, active listening, and open communication, he stopped merely assigning tasks and started understanding his team's needs and what they value, also called balance. This approach allowed him to connect with what motivated his team members and then support them in ways that enhance their drive and commitment.
Okay, so you get the idea. That's that tool that I use called Doodly. I'm sure you've seen it before. It's not that difficult to use. It's a fairly high monthly subscription cost, but if you like that and you want to create that something like that, you can do it. So that if you get the idea of that video, that kind of describes servant leadership. Democratic leadership involves the leader making decisions based on the input of each team member. If I'm a democratic leader, if the team, if I say, hey, we're going to do this together and I want to use the democratic style, and if we have a decision to make, let's say we're going to decide where we're going to take the company picnic, is it going to go over to Founders Park in the Keys, or is it going to go to Tropical Park in Miami? And I say, but it's up to you guys and you guys decide. I have an opinion as to where I want to go. I probably say I want to go to Founders Park, and I go back into that room, and this applies to everything. I go back into the room, and the people in the room say, "Well, we want to go to Tropical Park," and in my heart, I wanted to go to Founders Park. But if the group decided, the majority of the group decided that they wanted to go to Tropical Park, as a Democratic leader, I have to take my vote and just I can cast my vote, but it's really up to the team. It's the democracy that's going to vote. The Democratic leadership is good sometimes, but I'm sure you can see at times it's not so good. Meaning there are times, I'll give you an example. I think I told you a story about after the hurricane when we were coming into work the next day after 2017, and the day it was everything was a mess, and the customers were calling us, and I had to decide whether or not we were going to work that day. Like I could have just said, "Hey, the office is closed. Just take care of yourself." I wasn't about to call all of my teammates and cast a vote and see what people think about going to work the next day. No, this was a time where I needed to be autocratic. I said, "No, we're going to work. If you can work today, I want you to come to work." I don't have time for a vote. I don't have time for a democratic opinion. Even if you did, even if the group said, no, we shouldn't have work today, Claude, I still decided that we're going to work, and that's the best decision for the company. And that's okay for me to make that decision. You can see in a role like that, most people think about it, would always vote, I don't want to go to work. I mean, what if it was just a typical Tuesday and you voted your whole company, said, who would like to work today? And yeah, I'm going to use a democratic approach. And everybody says, no, I would not like to work today. And the majority of people said no. And I just said, okay, fine, no problem. Everybody just go home. You can see why that style is good in certain areas and not so good in other areas. Autocratic leadership characterized by individual control over decisions with little input from group members, often leading to high levels of productivity and highly structured environments. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not good. Sometimes leaders have to be autocratic in order to get things done. When we work in our faculty meetings, because of the way in which the faculty work, it becomes very frustrating because it's too democratic, and there's committees, and we're going to make a decision. We have to have majority vote. Oh my gosh! Sometimes I just wish people would just say, you know what, we're going to go ahead and do this. I'm like, thank God, we're making progress. Like let's just do it. Just make a decision. So it can be frustrating without autocratic leadership. Autocratic leadership is needed sometimes. Transformational leadership, leaders inspire and motivate the followers to achieve extraordinary outcomes, and in the process develop their own leadership capacity. Being transformative as leader usually means that you have to have a significant value, a foundation. You have to have a real passion for what you do. You have to be a good orator of your concept, and you have to be extroverted. You got to get in front of people, because if you're going to transform other people through your leadership, these are storytellers. This kind of leadership. I enjoy transformational leadership, one of my favorite ones. And then transactional leadership, we already know what that means. A couple more. Laissez-faire leadership. It means let it be. Why do I have to be involved? Sometimes you don't need a leader in every situation. You let them figure it out. My 9-year-old and my 4-year-old fight about stuff. For anybody who has kids, and they're fighting, 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 and they come to me and say, "Daddy, you know, Ryla won't let me, get the toy." And I look at her, look at the other one, and I say, "Okay, if you want me to get involved, neither one of you are going to get the toy." It's going to be, if you want me to get involved, I will. And that's probably what's going to happen. But I think you guys should figure it out yourself. What do you think about that? And they're like, "Oh, yeah. Okay, Dad, we'll figure it out." And they go back and they figure it out. And they usually do a better job than they would if I went in there and started messing with, autocratically said, here's what's going to happen. Laissez-faire, let it be. Sometimes leaders have to use that style too. Charismatic leadership, situational leadership, participative leadership, and strategic leadership. We'll have time to talk about all those. Okay, this is a fun one. And if you tuned out, I ask you to tune back in, because I want you to think about the frustrations of leadership. And I want somebody to just look at these things that say frustrations of leadership, and somebody tell me, have you been in a position of leadership, and can you attest that leadership isn't always fun? Sometimes I look at people that are in positions of leadership, and the wrong phrase would be like, be a sycophant. I've heard that. It's probably a weird phrase, but you admire them. You want to be like them. You say, wow, wouldn't it be so nice to be that person? But what we don't know is what they're actually doing behind closed doors when they're not front facing, and the issues and the problems that they have to deal with every day. And I always say to people, I went to Colorado a couple weeks ago, and I consulted an organization there, a great organization that was filled with amazing people. And I listened to them. And when I listen to them, usually there's a person that will very much complain about their leader. And they have rightful complaints. And it seems to me that their leader isn't doing certain things that they want their leader to do. But I listen, and then I always try to reset them, and I say, hey, I know this is hard, and I'm sure that the leader would be better. But I always want you to give the leader the benefit of the doubt, because look at the things that they're responsible for, including you in some way or another. Try to understand it from their perspective and give them some credit for trying their best and not being perfect. So that helps them sometimes look at things a little bit differently, because seeing it from our perspective is easier as, say, like a follower or a team member, but seeing it from a leader's perspective and understanding what they're dealing with, not just watching their public aura or seeing their status or their role or their title or their salary. There's so much more to it than that. Too much uncompensated overtime. It tends to be that if you're working in a leadership role, you're on salary. And leaders that are on salary are usually commissioned to perform organizational objectives. However, you get these objectives done is how you get them done. How much time it takes to get those objectives done doesn't matter. Sometimes you got to work 6 days a week. Sometimes you got to work 15-hour days. It has to get done. Of course, there's benefits. Maybe some days you can work from home or take a day off, but that's tough sometimes. It's uncompensated. Too many headaches. That's kind of general. Facing perform or perish mentality. Insufficient authority for responsibility. That's a fascinating one. What that means, and I'll try to put it in perspective for you. Let's say that you are the property manager of what is it? Continental Park. If you've ever been to Continental Park, I used to live in Dadeland. There's a cool little park there called Continental Park. It's fairly small. And this is what's in my mind as I try to explain the story to you. Their job, as far as the county is concerned, and this was a student that was in one of my classes, was to manage this park to make sure that it was well cared for. And one of the things that they needed to do to manage the park was to do the landscaping, to mow the grass and do all this stuff. But the person that worked on their team was not given access to the landscape tool shed, couldn't get in. And when that person tried to get into the landscape tool shed, they said, no, sorry, we're not going to give you the key. You don't have the authority to get into this closet. So essentially, she was tasked to care for the park. Her staff member was tasked to make sure there was landscaping equipment, but they didn't have the authority to get into the closet to access the tools to do the job. So that's a problem because if you don't have the authority, but you have the responsibility, like you have to make sure the park is clean, but you don't have authority to get the landscape equipment to clean it, that's a problem. And sometimes leaders face those too much responsibility, not enough authority problems, and that's a difficult tension to manage. Loneliness. Just kind of pause on that one for a second for anyone in the class who's been in a leadership role. It can be lonely. Too much organizational politics. Ugh. Pursuit, it could be good or bad. Pursuit of conflicting goals. I'll rephrase that. Never is it good to have too much organizational politics, but politics exists. We have a whole chapter on that. Pursuit of conflicting goals. I would like to do this. Like I'm here so that I can grow in my career and be a blessing to the people around me. Okay, that's awesome. This person's here in order to get free lunch. Well, we're probably not going to work too well together. Like there's a conflicting goal there, and that's a problem. Being perceived as unethical, job fatigue and burnout. As a leader, I'll go back to this conflicting goals. Not everybody wants what you want. Not everybody's there for the same reasons, and they could very well tell you they're there for that reason, but they're really not. And our job is to uncover some of that. So those are all the downsides of leadership. The upsides: a feeling of power and prestige, a chance to help others grow and develop, higher income, respect and status, good opportunities for advancement, a feeling of being in on things, opportunity to control money and other resources. There's a great book called The Motive by Patrick Lencioni. I should have put it on recommended books. I don't think I did, but it talks about the reasons why people get into leadership. And he explains that if people get into the leadership position just for this is why they get into leadership, because they want a feeling of power and prestige, they want high income, respect and status, on and on. If this is their motive, then there's a high likelihood that they're going to fail as a leader or they're going to be perceived as not a good leader because their motives are very self-serving. The satisfactions mixed with the frustrations and a good reason to get in leadership, to serve others, to help others, to grow in responsibility, to take on additional projects, to change a community, to change a business, to influence the world in a positive way. These are better motives than I want to make more money and I want more power and I want my friends on social media to think I'm cool. So I want to apply for the leadership position. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. Okay. Yeah, let's keep going. The leadership effectiveness is when you think about effectiveness, what we need to think about when we think about effectiveness is, did we accomplish the goal we sent out to accomplish? So that's what effectiveness is if my job as a soccer player for the US team in the World Cup, so cool, it's coming to Miami, and I'm a goalkeeper, and the other team scored no goals and they had 16 shots on goal. I was very effective. I know that kind of is confusing because the goalkeeper goals, all this kind of stuff. Because my goal was to keep the ball out of the goals. So I was effective in the way I did that. If it was the other way around, I wasn't effective. So just think about it that way. The effectiveness is the ability to accomplish what it is you set out to accomplish. So how do we gauge this effectiveness? Why is it important as a leader that we're effective? It's not just about being a good person and having fun and being approachable and having good values. It also means that we actually have to do something and that we have to accomplish the goals we set out to accomplish. So how leadership effectiveness equals the combined influence of three set factors. This is pretty interesting. How effective a leader is, and let me see if I can draw this. All of you hopefully will be tuning in like, hey, if I'm going to be successful as a leader, or if I want my leader to be successful, what are some factors? These are the factors, by the way, that contribute to leadership effectiveness. Well, the chapter we're about to get into is leader characteristics, behavior, and style. So what the individual leader does is important. Their characteristics, behavior, and style. All the stuff that I said before that, it's not just about that, but that has something to do with it. But two-thirds of this equation towards effectiveness lie outside of the leader. What are those two things that lie outside of the leader? Well, the group members, characteristics and behavior. The team, the people that the leader is trying to influence, that has a big impact on whether or not the leader is effective. The other variable, the third variable, is the context, internal, external environment. In what realm is the leader leading? Is it a soccer coach? Is it a drill sergeant for the army? Is it a president of a university? Is it an electrician that's leading a team of other electricians to accomplish a job? Well, those are all totally different contexts. So the context matters, and the resources that the person has within that context really matters. The group matters, and then of course the individual leader matters as well. All of these things matter for a leader to be effective. Just test my sound real quick. Yeah, whatever. Keep going. All right, so what the leader's traits are, the leader behavior and style, the group members' characteristics, and the internal environment. Whether or not a leader is effective depends on these things. Get the idea. About 70 to 90% of work in organizations is performed by the people in follower roles. Leaders are also followers, and followers also exhibit leadership. Followers differ in their individual engagement approach to being a group member. So that's fascinating too, is how people follow, and the different approaches they use to following a leader are great. So you're in a meeting, you got three people on your team, and the one person is just looking at you and they're like, yes, sir, I'll do whatever you say, sir. No problem, Mr. Kirshner. I got it. They're like taking notes and they marching orders. And the other person is in there raising their hand, like, I'm sorry, do we have to do it this way or do we have to do it this way? And they have all sorts of questions. And that's just sort of different. And then the other person just sitting there quiet, looking at me. And they're daydreaming about something they're going to do tomorrow. And they're looking at their watch, like, when are we going to get out of this meeting? And all three of them could very well be great followers, but they're different. They're vehemently different in the way that they're following me. One person's fully engaged in taking notes. The other person's fully engaged in asking questions. The other person's disengaged, but still it accomplishes their task. Maybe they're skilled in a different area. So we have to understand how our followers differ in the way that they follow. Key aspects of an effective group member includes types of followers, the characteristics of productive followers, and the collaboration between leaders and followers. Great leaders are made by great groups. In the modern organization, leaders and followers often switch roles. And Petros Galaskin says, in reality, one cannot claim that he or she is a leader or follower at all times, in all circumstances. Actually, like that. In reality, one cannot claim that he or she is a leader or follower in all times, or at all times, and in all circumstances. Basically, what that means to me is at times I'm going to be a leader, at times I'm going to be a follower, but I can't say I'm just a leader or that I'm just a follower, because I'm sort of both. That's the collaboration between the two. But here's how I want to try to frame this and hopefully tune you in, because it's important to understand that, okay, so let's look at it this way. A lot of times people say on social media, or they'll say certain things like, we got to get that hustle. Oh, we got to hustle. We got to, we got to do, we just got to hustle. But what's the problem with everybody that says, let's just hustle? What's the problem with that? Okay, well done. But the reality is when people say, I'm out here hustling, it's ill-defined. And are they really hustling? Or are they just typing on social media about the fact that they're hustling? That's not really hustling. So if they're sharing that they're hustling, are they hustling? So what I'm trying to get you through a little bit of humor, I'm sure you can tell, is when people say, I'm leading, or I'm a leader, this is what people say, or I'm in charge, I'm the leader, I study leadership. What in the heck are they talking about? Well, this one theory of leadership says, well, they're talking about traits that they possess in order to accomplish certain goals, certain tasks. And it's one of many types of ways in which leadership happens, how it occurs. It's the trait-based approach to leadership. So here it is. Great framework. General personality traits. This isn't characteristics or motives. This is personality traits. Actually, it's a little bit of characteristics. But these are the types of personality traits that leaders tend to need to have or should have. Let me frame it this way. If you have these personality traits, leadership will be a little bit easier for you, or you will be a little bit more effective if you possess more of these traits. Is it possible to have all the traits? No. But is it important for us to know as individuals what it takes to be, leaders? And yeah, self-confidence is one of them. It's so funny how self-confidence is number one up here, and next to it is humility. It's a dichotomy, it's a paradox. I have to be self-confident, but I also have to be humble. So what do those two things mean? We'll talk about that. The likability factor, that's a big one. Do you like your leader? Are they kind? Are they easy to talk to? Or do they have a RBF face? And that's not fun. It could be there's for a woman and a man, I think there's two different words with that, but men have RBF faces too. Towards self-evaluation, trustworthiness, authenticity, extroversion, assertiveness, enthusiasm, optimism, and warmth, sense of humor. So if one person just shout out, and I'll try to track it, what's your favorite of all these? What I'm trying to alleviate here or kind of put out there is the same thing we looked at before is these characteristics of a leader are important, but then you think about the characteristics of the group. Well, the group is going to value these things a little bit differently in a leader. I mean, I look at something like assertiveness. I feel like leaders at times, I don't want to follow a leader who isn't assertive. Meaning assertive, like if somebody was doing something they shouldn't be doing, or somebody was speaking ill of somebody else in a meeting, I want the leader to assert that that is not how we treat people around here. Please be quiet, or whatever that may look like. That's important to me. And I'm kind of just throwing that out as an example. When I say that's important to me, I'm sort of just using this as a, you know, to some people on the call, that might be true as well. I'll tell you what else is important to me because it's lightens the mood and it's fun to be around. It's a sense of humor. Do we always have to be so serious in leadership? Not really. You know, we can have fun. We can have a sense of humor. We can tell a joke and it's okay. So as you can tell, there's a lot of things happening here. And it doesn't, my point that I'm trying to drive home is it's not like you have to be all of these things. And it's not like you have to be all of these things because you may work in a context, a situation with a group of people that doesn't value all these things. You know, maybe your a sense of humor in your workplace is full fine. It's not okay to be funny in what you do. Let's just say that you're a, I don't know, police officer and you're constantly joking and you're making light of situations that aren't funny. Having a sense of humor may not be the right type of characteristic for that type of situation. You get the idea. But these are powerful leadership effectiveness in many situations, not all situations. These are powerful words here to consider. And we're not going to unpack all of them. I'll unpack some of them. Let's see, humility. Let's talk about that one. We've talked about self-confidence before. Humility is an interesting one. And there's a great test on it, actually. I think it's worth. Okay, folks that are participating with me, here's what I want you to do. I want you to be honest with yourself, and I want you to be self-reflective of yourself. This is a self-evaluation of your humility. Humble people, of course, find it difficult to perceive themselves as being humble. Nevertheless, taking this self-quiz will help sensitize you to aspects of your own behavior and and attitudes that could reflect your level of humility. Because the results of this quiz are not being used for somebody else to judge your level of humility, there is no point in attempting to create a positive impression. Here are the questions. And the two options are you mostly agree with the statement or you mostly disagree with the statement. So when I read this statement, in your mind, say, okay, I mostly agree with that. Okay, I mostly disagree with that. And you'll get the idea. All right, this statement says almost everybody who knows me well thinks that I have exceptional interpersonal skills. Mostly agree, mostly disagree. Number two is I carefully listen to other people without finishing their sentences for them. Agree or disagree. Three is I enjoy listening to other people describe their accomplishments. Four is when things go wrong, I look first to blame other people. Five is it. So you're saying I mostly agree with that or I mostly disagree. Five is it annoys me when other people give me advice on the job. Six is I rarely applaud other people's accomplishments. Seven is I usually laugh louder than other people at my own jokes. It's me laughing at my own joke, but not too loud. It annoys me when others on the job do not say positive things about my accomplishments. Mostly agree, mostly disagree. Nine is I have a strong desire to learn and improve. Mostly agree, mostly disagree. 10 is with few exceptions, I am the smartest person in the room. Mostly agree, mostly disagree. 11 is I get very upset whenever I am in conflict with other people. 12 is I am willing to admit my mistakes and limitations. 13 is I tend to ignore information that might require me to change my plans. You get the idea. So here's with the evaluation, I'll do more if we had the time, but you can go ahead and take it on page 29 if you want to. These statements, let's see which ones. Mostly agree. Score yourself 1 point for each of the following questions you answered. Mostly agree. 2, 3, 9, 12. 2. I carefully listen to other people without. Okay, so these ones mostly agree are statements that if you mostly agree with them, it's an indication that you are humble, right? So these are good things. You want to mostly agree with these ones. Two is you want to mostly agree with that. I carefully listen to other people without finishing their sentences. That's good. Three is I enjoy listening to other people describe their accomplishments. That's a good one. 9, I have a strong desire to learn and improve. That's good. 12, I am willing to admit my mistakes and limitations. You understand that's a good thing for humble people. 18 is I welcome feedback on my performance. That's a good thing. 19 is I welcome feedback on my job related behavior. So welcoming feedback is a theme of being humble. 20 is I am willing to learn from others. These are all good statements of humble people. People who Score yourself 1 point. So people who mostly agree with these statements are not humble. If you mostly agree with this, almost everybody who knows me well thinks I have an exceptional interpersonal skills. If you mostly agree with that, you're not really humble. Four, four is when things go wrong, I look first to blame other people. If you mostly agree with that, you got to work on your humility. Five is it annoys me when other people give me advice on the job. If that's true, if you mostly agree if it annoys you if people give you advice, you need to work on your humility. Six is I rarely applaud other people's accomplishments. So if you find it hard to praise other people when they win or when they do things well, you got a humility issue. So you can see, I mean, there's ways to understand how one can become a little bit more humble, and humility is a very important aspect of leadership. It's a fun one. So we talked enough about humility. For self-evaluations, trustworthiness. Let me go to trustworthiness for a second. So the term is trustworthiness, and this is the 8 pillars of trust. I'm not positive that it's scientifically grounded, but the source is fairly credible. And I remember I wrote an article on this, a blog. So I teach this in the classes when I go and consult with clients about these 8 pillars of trust. And with the eight pillars of trust, and again, people say, okay, here I am, I'm hustling. Well, what does that mean? Well, I'm trustworthy. Well, what does that mean? How do we define trustworthy? By the way, hustling, I think, is leveraging resources and being able to um, work hard. It's a lot to do with resilience. And then hustle means hard work. I said that already. So there are aspects of hustle. There's actually a scientific article on that as well. But when you define it and you know what it looks like in action, it's a lot easier to do it yourself. And the same thing is with these pillars of trust. Clarity. People trust the clear and mistrust the ambiguous. Trustworthiness means you have to be clear. Clarity requires honesty. With honesty comes the need to share your vision, your purpose, and your expectations. Think about that. If somebody's clear with these things, vision, purpose, and expectations, and say, hey, here's what I'm doing. We're going on that boat. Remember, Lorena, we're going on that trip, and here's what we're doing. Here's where we're going. Here's why it's important to me. Would you like to come with me? Here's all the information I want to tell you. Now you are gifted with the ability to now choose wisely because I've given you the information. I was clear with you, and you can trust me. Compassion. People put faith in those who care beyond themselves. There's a difference between sympathy, empathy, and compassion. Sympathy says they walk past the person and they're in a hole, and they look at the hole and they say, "Wow, that sucks," and they keep walking. And in empathy, you walk past the same person that's in a hole or in a ditch or something, and you say, "Man, that sucks," and you jump in the ditch with them, and you say, "Here we are together. I feel you. I understand what it's like to be in this hole." Compassion is you walk past the hole and you say, "Man, that sucks," and you go get a rope and you put the rope down in the hole and you pull the person out of the hole. And when they get out of the hole, you give them a big hug and say, "How you feeling now?" That's compassion. It takes the sympathy and empathy and it puts it into action. People put faith in those who care beyond themselves. Show that you can look beyond your own needs and wants. Trust and the ability to show empathy go hand in hand. There is a reason why we still hear people who do not people who do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. Very important. Compassion. Character. Man, it's a good one. People notice those who do what's right over what's easy. Big time. Character is a complex word. For our purposes, let's consider the two main components to be integrity and morality. With integrity, you are being consistent with your own thoughts, words, and actions, and that too a strong moral compass. And you are giving people someone they can trust. We have a whole class on business ethics and character, and building character, and making moral decisions, which is very there's something called moral relativism, which is not necessarily a good thing. It's like, oh well, if you think it's good and it's moral to you, then it should be moral to everyone. Well, no, this is moral. No, this everything's moral. Let's just do it all. Let's just be relative as to what's moral. And people who have true character really do. They're willing to stand up for things they believe in. They do have a moral foundation, and they're perfectly fine asserting that moral foundation. Competency. People have confidence in those who stay fresh, relevant, and capable. We talked about competency in the first class. Commitment. This is a big one. I had a band on my arm for a long time. I lost it, and it says "Be committed." And I can say that to everything. Be committed to you all, my students at Miami-Dade College. Be committed to my wife and my family and caring for them and loving them. Being committed to the things I say yes to. And if I put myself out there to say, I'm going to do this, I do it. I'm committed to it. I want to work with people and I trust people who are committed to whatever it is they put their name on. Connection. People want to follow, buy from, and be around those who are willing to connect and collaborate. Contribution. People immediately respond to results. Consistency. Big one. I want to be trustworthy sometimes. So I'm trustworthy sometimes. I'm trustworthy when my bank account's full and I'm happy. But when I don't go to the gym in the morning and I don't have a lot of money and I'm hungry, I tend to lie and manipulate and tell false stories. No, this person needs to be consistent in their actions and their deeds. They need to be consistent regardless of whether or not they got to work out in the morning or their bank accounts high or low. They have to have trustworthiness all the time, all the time. So consistency is a big deal. This is, ladies and gentlemen, the 8 pillars of trust. They should do an 8 pillars of hustle, by the way. Ah ha ha. For those of you who wonder why I keep referring back to hustle, I think I have a diagram for you. I do. Look at this. So here, if you can see, let me stop sharing for a second. Okay, so this says hustle is leveraging techniques, guerrilla tactics, bootstrapping, networking, and improvisation. And so again, this is kind of off topic, but since I here's the definition of hustle: an entrepreneur's urgent, unorthodox actions that are intended to be useful in addressing immediate challenges and opportunities under conditions of uncertainty. It includes working urgently to realize opportunities or solve problems, pushing through in spite of difficulties. I like that one. Working quickly and taking unorthodox actions to address challenges, looking to unconventional approaches to overcome obstacles, deviate from normal behavior to develop a venture. Obviously, this is from the entrepreneurship conference that I was just at, and that's what hustle is. I figured I would mention that for all of you. All right, that's about all I got, ladies and gentlemen, for tonight. I'll end on the hustle note.